Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the squirt of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka their early work was a little new wave for my tastes, but by the time Mortician released Chainsaw Dismemberment, I felt like they really came into their own, creatively and commercially.
And I'd like to hear those early new wave demos. Just imagine those guys with like really sort of fluffy Depeche Mode mohawks.
Yeah, you wanna hear the Mortician take on like Ministries with Sympathy.
That would be pretty good. Yeah, I do hate new wave, but I do like Ministry. Yes, and I am the black metal guy, aka skate gore band called Ramputated.
Ooh, that's solid. I mean, that's probably like a mincecore band out in California that's done like a 7-inch with Couple Skate or Warf Lurch or something like that.
Let's see, Ramputated Bandcamp. I believe there was a hardcore band called Violent Ramp.
Violent Ramp? I mean, that doesn't really mean it. Like a skate ramp that is aggressive in and of itself?
Yes.
Huh,
it's a good band name because it's kind of like Japanese English.
Yeah, you got to think about it for a second.
Yeah.
But if Ramputated hasn't been taken, I would say register it now.
Yeah, I should do it now and then charge whichever band wants to use it.
I was about to say it's sort of like domain squatting.
Yeah,
Can you Bandcamp band name squat?
Jesus. Well, you do the rest of the intros. I've got to get on it.
You got a retirement plan to set up. I was just thinking, oh man, how many great band names do I have? Oh man, I just got to start registering all of them. Oh man, we've got an interesting show today.
We do.
Yeah. Yes, everybody, we are covering the album. All right, you can stop asking me about it. We are going to cover it. But first, let's cover something else that's related to the show a little bit more closely. So, Thos Ælla, whose first record we covered last year, which was titled Abnegation Psalms, the dude behind that, Ghoul, aka Derek, from Father Befouled, hit me up on Facebook talking about the new record that just came out. He gave me a heads up a couple months ago that it was going to be released, and so I've just been hanging out waiting for the release date. So the sophomore record is out, called Sempiternal Mobocracies. Last one wasn't. This one's out on Voidhanger. Was Abnegation out on Voidhanger?
Abnegation was out on
Sunshine Ward.
Sunshine Ward.
Yeah. So now he's with Voidhanger. With the new record, just came out about a week ago. So I listened to this one. You had checked out like the preview track that was up a while back, and I know that you weren't really a fan.
Really quick, yeah, very quick, but not much.
Okay, so I gotta say this was kind of a surprise. I didn't really know what to expect from this, but I ended up really, really liking this record. And I thought that it was actually a really big step up from Abnegation Psalms. For those who don't remember, we covered it last year. Thos Ælla on that record did kind of the arrogant thrash thing with a big streak of kind of Swedish melodic black death in there, as well as this little hint of, I don't know, kind of bluesy southern stuff going on in some of the lead guitar riffing.
The way I remember it, I remember the two extremes. It may have come out as kind of arrogant thrash sounding, but like the way I remember it is kind of like Rian Chaos if it had the big Swedish Black Death riffs that everyone wanted it to have when it came out.
Yeah. So basically, I thought it was a solid record. It wasn't really my thing. I didn't go back to it, but I thought it was an interesting starting point. Now with this new one, Sempiternal Mobocracies, I think I'm going to go back to this one a few times. So as far as like major differences go, a lot of the thrashiness has been kind of pared down on this, in the most melodic aspects have been pushed way up front. And in addition, the kind of bluesy southern stuff is still there, but now it's incorporated with a very sort of U.S. power metal style that is kind of folded into the texture of this music. It seems to be continuing a theme that we've been seeing over the past year or so, which is just guys from the extreme metal scene rediscovering old power and traditional heavy metal. Thos Ælla doesn't go quite as far down that rabbit hole as something like the fucking record, Auspicious Atavism.
Yeah, but Anahata.
Yeah, Anahata. Yeah, it's all A's. I always forget which is which. But I mean, it's still definitely a sort of melodic Swedish Black Death record. But it's hard to deny just how important the kind of scrappy U.S. power metal and trad metal energy is. So let's listen to In Vain the Ocean's Black, which is the second full track. And we're just going to play it directly from the beginning. And what I like so much about this record is this like sense of excitement that it has. It's like somebody eagerly pulling you by the hand through a crowd. But the person pulling you is just like riff after riff after riff. It's so excited to show you what's up next. So let's just listen to this one for a couple minutes from the beginning, and I think you'll get immediately what I'm talking about there. Dude, the moment that song started, we just started cackling.
Especially when it, like, you do, like, the fast riffing very briefly, and then you drop to the halftime. Like,
oh yeah, it's like Guns N' Roses shit going on.
Yeah, it's already at the big, like, it's 10 seconds in, and we're already at the big, like, raise a lighter sing-along chorus.
Yeah, it's the sheer excess of this record somehow never failed to surprise me. Like, there's so many, like, eyebrow-raising moments across this whole thing, just like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I would say it's impossible to, like, I can't really dislike this. I'm not, like, it's just a bunch of, like, really well-executed, fun, kind of epic-sounding riffs, right? Mm-hmm. It's, that last riff was pretty cool. That was very weirdly harmonized.
Yeah, you get it's got the weird harmony, but the core of it is like almost like a Stevie Ray Vaughan kind of thing. So you've got that little bit of like southern stuff tucked away.
Very.
Oh, go ahead.
Go. Well, yeah, I don't know. Very sort of horror vacui. Everything is filled in. The cover art is great. And although it's made to be, kind of horror-y and Lovecrafty. I can definitely see how the music is like sort of, the cover is filled, it's this awesome kind of surrealist, multiple perspective kind of Escher maze thing that's traversed by tentacles and connective tissue and strange spiders. And, it's kind of swirling down from you, and it's, you can see how the album is kind of just inviting you to like snowboard down it.
That's very good. Yeah. No, this is. I mean, you landed on something which is like, yeah, it's hard to dislike this, because my thing when I heard the first record was sort of like, this is neat, and it's also like kind of tongue in cheek, the whole thing. And I think this is too. I think he's really embracing sort of the inherent goofiness of this, and I guess for this guy Derek, Thos Ælla can just be a place where he can just do whatever he wants. You don't have to really worry about internal consistency. It's like, let's just do the coolest thing at every moment. Let's just do the coolest, shreddingest thing on guitar that we can do that's still almost like a song.
Yeah, I think that's honestly probably good in terms of figuring out what is specific about this band, because I think on the last one it sounded halfway, it was like very serious riffs, like dawn riffs, kind of scowling neoclassical riffs that were then like thrown alongside just like Danzig stuff, swaggering blues riffs and chug parts,
big neoclassical skate punk riffs and shit.
Exactly. And so like, I think here there's still, skill and subtlety in a lot of the main blasted chorded riffs. You can still hear the Dawn influence. And, more Sacramentum here, I think.
Yeah.
But like, he had to choose whether he wanted to have a serious band or like a kind of fun band, and he was just like, I'm going to go for the things that really set this up. Yeah, the skill at writing the Swedish Black Death band riffs did set this project apart, but he's like, I'm going to go for the other thing. I just want to make a like fun, crazy band.
Well, actually, like across this record, there's tons of great like traditional Swedish Black Death riffs. But now they're more used as connective tissue between these kind of huge, very sort of rock-oriented moments. Which I think is really interesting. And I mean, in a way, this almost hews even closer to that idea of, what if Re Chaos, but still like an actual dissection record.
I agree. Going for the Re Chaos thing is just like the fun move.
Definitely.
It's it's also like what if Re Chaos, but more exciting. I mean, I think the limitation of that record for a lot of people was that
it's kind of plotting.
The moments that were just like plotting groove metal, or that sounded like the Black Album, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the highlights of Re Chaos are like just awesome.
Yeah. So let me get to my other sample real quick off a song called Bloodlust Inamorata, and here we're going to get really into the sort of power metal stuff. And I think those are some of the best moments on the record, is where he gets really into this sort of extreme power metal territory. And honestly, just listening to this little section of this song, right from the middle of it, you can imagine this almost being paradigmatic for a new articulation of what, pop extreme metal could be. So, I've told the joke plenty on the show, and so have plenty of other people, that, Melodeath is just power metal. Like Gothenburg is just power metal with growls. Which is like true to a degree. It's also a reduction. But what if a band were to take that conceit really seriously and just lean into it? So let's check out this section, and let's just imagine, what if we had bands that just did this? So you can probably imagine, like, just a band that's just that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got I really want to point out, like, the blast riffs in that section are really kind of remarkable in the way they're designed. Like, if you're just looking at it from, like, the kind of the texture choices, you know, the kind of dyadic textures, then you've got something very, like, Franco-Finnish. But then the bass notes that he's choosing are just, like, classic sort of major key power metal chord structure things. So he's found this, like, this wonderful through line between these different ideas. And then, of course, you know, we kick into the part where you say, I just like it because it sounds like Offspring, and yes.
Yeah, that you just like it because it sounds like Offspring, yeah.
Yeah, which is funny because, like, actually, as I've been listening to more and more punk and fits and starts, I'm like, oh, and I like all of this punk stuff because it kind of sounds like Iron Maiden, and Iron Maiden also sounds like all this even earlier punk stuff. So this unbroken thread of guitar ideas that kind of goes through both genres in some way. And I really like the kind of, like, gruff, clean vocal stuff that he's doing across this. I wish it wasn't quite so far in the background. It's like, dude, it sounds good. Like, push it up front.
Honestly, I barely process the vocals.
Yeah, he's doing a lot. He doesn't do a lot of just, like, the gruff, clean stuff on its own. He's usually got a layer of, you know, screeches behind it. But it's like, dude, there's
I swear,
solid.
that hit me like an instrumental passage. I
Yeah,
think just because the music is so dizzying. Like, there were vocals.
It's very bombastic.
So.
But no, yeah, it's I don't know. And really, the whole record is littered with moments like the ones that I've shared here. Basically, every song has one huge pivotal passage of just, like, fucking dizzying guitar pyrotechnics. If you're a metal guitarist and you do melodic stuff at all, you should listen to this and study it, because some of the guitar shit going on is fucking crazy. And he's got a great way of reincorporating the lessons of Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix and just kind of... and Thin Lizzy and all just, like, classic, you know, guitar-focused rock artists since the 70s, basically. There's just always something new and exciting to hear on every new track of this. And at the end of it, I was just like, fuck yeah, this is what I wanted from this project all along.
Hail! This is Brandon from Cromlech, and you're listening to Terminus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back, and I'm, well, yeah, I was about to say you're probably looking at this video now if you're on YouTube, but you're probably not. You're probably in another tab doing something unrelated while you listen to it. But if you will go back to the tab where you're playing Terminus right now, your eyes do not deceive you. You are, in fact, about to listen to a review of the newest Grand Belial's Key record, Kohanic Charmers, 17 years in the making. Released on the Weltenfeind imprint, which I think is basically just kind of like an individual imprint for GBK and Argos Lent and certain absurd stuff. I'm pretty sure it's like World Terror Committee that basically runs it, but, you know, it's whatever.
It's probably on hold, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, obviously, this is something I'm super excited to talk about. I've definitely gushed about Grand Belial's Key several times.
Oh, wait, it looks like Weltenfeind is owned by Jalal.
Oh, he handles it?
Is it Jalal or Galal?
I thought it was Galal, but I don't know. It's like old Sumerian stuff. Who knows? I don't speak cuneiform. No. So yeah, 17 years since Kosherat. This is one of those records that I considered sort of a Duke Nukem Forever thing. It was always in the works. I never expected it to actually happen. But then basically out of nowhere, the release date gets announced. It's not even published digitally, it's just on CD. It took a while for those CDs to trickle out, but now they have gotten online, and here we are. Obviously, I've talked about GBK on the show many times before. I'm a huge fan. Kosherat in particular is probably like a top 20 black metal record of all time for me. And here we are, 17 years later, it actually happened. And I guess the question in everyone's mind is going to be, does it live up to the hype? Does this live up to the 17-year gap? And I can't give a clean answer to that, because this isn't exactly what I expected from it, but it's phenomenally good to me. I think that...
Wouldn't that be living up to the hype?
I think that... Well, that's an interesting discussion, because I think this record...
Does it deserve to be ranked alongside their other records?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, 100%.
Because you could do a competent record much later in your career that would sound like a comeback album. But this, I take it, is not... it'd be like a good sort of summing up of your previous work or something. But this, I take it, is more than a comeback album.
Yeah, no, this feels, it's more than a comeback album. I mean, I guess one of the biggest compliments I can give it is that it feels contiguous with the rest of the discography. There's definitely points where you can tell there's more modern influences, that these guys didn't stop listening to black metal for 17 years. And there's incorporation of some elements that sound like almost surprisingly familiar, given the current landscape of black metal. But they've successfully fused those modern elements with the core of GBK's own personality, which is just so specific to this band. And I don't think it's going to replace Kosher as my favorite record, but I'd say, is it as good as Judeobeast Assassination? Yeah, I'd say it's right in the middle of their discography, and for a band that's been offline for so long, I don't know what more I could ask for. But I want to talk to you about it, because surprisingly, you weren't like a huge GBK guy. I thought that you listened to them a lot, but recently I learned it's just been a little bit over the years. And you just recently listened to Kosher for the first time, with me suggesting it, just to kind of prep for this.
Yeah, I gave it a couple plays a few days ago. And I liked Kosher a lot. I definitely like Kosher better than this. But in general, I would say, I think my impression so far, I'm going to have to listen to the older stuff now, too.
I think you'd really like the earliest stuff.
I think I'd like the first album best. Yeah, I Mocking the Philanthropist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that and the Witnessing the Regicide EP. Mm-hmm. Because that's it's almost like, I want to describe it as kind of like that band you really like, Cauldron Black Ram. It's just really scrappy, really gnarly shit.
Oh, yeah, no, this is totally related to that. I mean, there's this set of, that's the weird thing, there's this set of rhythms that appear primarily first on GBK, Argoslant, Cauldron Black Ram, Stargazer. Mm-hmm. Right.
These kind of like plotting, like knuckle dragging.
Yes, and Cauldron Black Ram is the alias of Stargazer, in the same way that Argoslant is kind of the other band of GBK.
Yeah.
So, yes, this sort of like 3 against 4 thing that sounds like a kind of, a sea shanty, or something soldiers would play at break in the Napoleonic Wars, right? It's kind of rhythm. So yeah, this set of swaggering rhythms, and I listened to a bit of Mocking the Philanthropist the other day, and I was like, oh, this sounds good. This sounds like Pagan Motorhead riffs.
Yeah.
So, I think in terms of this later stuff, I would say that GBK is, for me, in black metal, kind of what Immolation is for you in death metal.
Okay.
It's something that I respect it from a distance. I think I'll probably listen, just in the same way that you've eventually gone back to Immolation, I'll probably listen to this band more. Certainly now I want to go back and listen to the early stuff. And it's possible I'll end up getting a lot more out of this album over time. I mean, the number one thing is that this is really sort of grower, not shower music. It's sophisticated songwriting. As you pointed out to me before, you're like, GBK really is a songs band. If you listen to it there's a way that GBK has become associated with, quote-unquote, the riffs.
Yeah.
Right? Which is really referring to a specific type of GBK riff that shows up way more on Argosland albums.
Mm-hmm. And probably shows up a lot more on Kosher compared to the rest of the discography.
Yeah, these kind of, florid, Baroque, sort of high-octane riffs with these dense harmonizations, right? the default riffing on here is somewhat different, right?
Yes.
And yeah. So like, I guess my take on it is, so it doesn't have those kinds of riffs that one might expect coming into it, though not initially, right? And as you listen to the record, right, you get into it more, you hear more of those kinds of riffs, and you hear all sorts of interesting development in the songs. You hear you hear very simple riffs sort of dialoguing with each other. You hear subtlety in the playing, cool vocal performance, all that, right? But in terms of the overall vibe not being my thing, I think I'd say, like, it would hit better for me if I lived somewhere warmer and owned a car.
I saw that in the notes. I thought that was kind of funny.
So I thought it through, right? So, like, and if I ever do either of these things, right, or both, right, I might end up listening to it more. It's like, because the thing that is, different from my taste is that the overall rhythmic feel, in terms of the rhythms and the tempos, hang out in this kind of pocket groove stuff that's sort of laid back.
Mm-hmm.
And, you've emphasized how this is a very rockish band, right? Sort of the root of the modern outlaw rock sound, right?
I'd say one of the important ones, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's very rockish, but it's really rockish. It sort of shuffles in this kind of loose rock and roll way. And, the mood is kind of dark Americana, but with a bit of a Latin feel.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, and then, of course, there's all the Phrygian stuff in the kind of Eastern style riffs.
Yeah, I don't know if it's deliberately, like, sounds, Southwest. I think it might be more, this guy clearly listens to a lot of, like, flamenco and probably, like, Spanish Baroque guitar music, and, if you make that more rock and roll, it sounds kind of Southwesty.
Belial did infamously live in Argentina for a couple years to be a soccer hooligan.
There we go. All right. So, and he brought back their guitar techniques.
Exactly.
But so, we've talked about a certain kind of riff that I don't like very much that you like, that we call Secret Agent Man.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
The default, like, sort of first few riffs on most of these songs, the sort of the verse riffing, where under the initial vocals, right, is often kind of Secret Agent Man. Mm-hmm. It's sort of, and, it has this kind of smooth, laid back, smooth vibe, and I think it really is good for evil cruising.
Yeah. No, I
and if I were cruising around being evil, I think I would listen to this more.
I agree. I agree on all those points, really, because I think you're correct. I think of GBK as, like, obviously they're, like, a crucial USBM band, but in a sense they're kind of just the world's most evil rock band. Mm-hmm. Like, and rock in the sense of, like, rock and roll. Like, a lot of these kind of rhythms and even certain kind of chording ideas reach back to the 60s and 70s. It's mm-hmm. really fascinating how this music is constructed. And the way these songs are structured are way more song-like, with a capital S than most black metal tracks are. These are songs built out of motivic ideas, melodically, built out of bridges, built out of big kind of anthemic choruses. So the aggregate effect is just something really different from the rest of black metal, which is one of the things that's made them so distinct over the years. Now, in terms of the kind of respectful distance thing, this is a really interesting tact they've taken on this record, which is that it doesn't really begin in a way that catches your ear. Like, the opening track, Prayer Shawl of the Firstborn Donkey, is like, it feels like it's supposed to come from the middle of the record, doesn't it?
That's the most Secret Agent Man,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it begins. The album begins in a very sort of flat, horizontal way, which I think is interesting. And the first couple tracks really are like that. It takes a little bit for this record to gather steam, but I think that was deliberate. There's some very flashy, showy parts on this record, but not as many as you might think from Coming After Kosherat, where, like, every track has a big moment. Here, there's tracks that are Sorry, go ahead.
Well, presumably, maybe it's a kind of thing where you're sort of counting on, if you're a huge fan of the band, right, the bread and butter riffing style is going to be essential to your liking it. Ooh, huge possum just went by my window. That's a good omen. But the bread
a real
and butter
American
riffing,
animal. There you go.
yeah, you're going to be there for the basic riffing style, right?
Yes.
So if you're a GBK fan, like, you hear that more stripped down riffing, and it's probably just like great, and you can roll with a couple tracks of those before they start pulling out the big guns.
Yeah. And I think also it was partly to, I don't know, it's almost like a counterintuitive thing for like a big comeback record. It's like, yeah, it's like, oh, what should we should start off with something explosive. We should start off with one of the huge tracks. No. Let's go with like one of the plainest tracks on the album to open this up and be like, we're still here. We're pretending that the 17 years didn't happen. We're continuing the course. I think it's really cool. You know, maybe if I didn't have such a relationship with the band, that wouldn't be as significant to me. But yeah,
No, I think that makes sense, and it's also it's some kind of statement, right? It's if you thought GBK was quote the riffs band that's going to deliver all the massive Argos Lentian hook riffs, right? It's not. If anything, like I think you would usually expect a guy's death metal band to be the more sort of technical and sophisticated, and the black metal band to be more sort of loose and shoot from the hip and kind of raw. This is a little bit different. Certainly, Argos Lent is technically demanding music, right, and has elaborate riffs, but GBK at least at this point in the discography, GBK is really subtle. This is a very subtle album, and it makes sense that it would start in an understated way.
Yeah. So speaking of which, let's you've got one off the second track. That kind of surprised me. So.
Yeah, let's start from there. Well, what I wanted to capture is a bit of the stuff that I can't get into so much, followed by the stuff where it starts landing for me more.
Okay.
So you know, at the beginning of Serpent, the sample from Serpent Bibliomancy, you'll hear riffs that are kind of like the riffs on Prayer Shawl, the Firstborn Donkey, on the first track. So this kind of cruise, you know, evil cruising riffs, and then it will escalate a bit. So there's the really sophisticated stuff.
Yeah, that riff in particular. I was trying to count it out when I thought to actually count it out. It's something like It's like 6 bars of 4/4 and then a 3/4 at the end. It's deceptively simple, but a lot of the chords are crossing the bars, so it's interesting.
That is a really cool riff. And it's not just that riff; it's the so you hear him ramp up through several levels of escalation, all of which have this kind of rock and roll vibe, right? And then, you know, and that's a hybrid riff. The first part of that riff, right, is played in this kind of severe Black Death lead kind of thing. And that, the inflections there sound, you can really hear this guy actually listens to classical music. And more specifically, I think, like Baroque music. And clearly, I mean, GBK fans will know this because of the stuff I'm kosher at, but, like, can, like, literally play classical guitar virtuosically. In a way that many metal guitarists, even quite really good ones who play stuff that has a classical inflection, just don't, right?
Well, I was kind of prepping for listening to this album. I was actually watching some kind of guitar covers of old GBK songs on YouTube. And it's really interesting to watch people play these songs on guitar, because the way you play these songs is not like, you know, standard black metal playing. It's a little bit death metal, but it really is much more rock and roll. It's tons of slides and bends. It's not really fixated on, even the trem is kind of slow. It's all about sort of like almost swing time elegant stuff. It's very unusual compared to basically anything else in extreme metal.
Yeah, it's like on this record, and I think on Kosher as well, it's like all the familiar elements to me from black metal are there, but configured in a way that, like, I could not have imagined, right? You know, it exists. Once you hear it, you're like, oh, clearly this is part of the possibility matrix, right? Clearly this is something you can do with black metal, but, like, you can see why this is one of the classic bands, right? This is very unique approach, and, you know, you can hear all the familiar elements, but the thing that's structuring it, this rock and roll sensibility, is basically outside of black metal and completely unique.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is secretly, like, despite the kind of punkish pedigree of this music, this is hyper long hair. All the way through.
Yeah. So that's what I'd written in the notes. So we should go there. So that's an interesting thing. It's like a completely unique thing about it is, although many individual riffs, including the first ones in, you know, every riff at the beginning of Serpent Bibliomancer, you could say that's a punky riff, right? You could say those are death rock riffs, or kind of, but there's tons of punky stuff throughout it, but the organizing sensibility is all the principles for songwriting are really long hair, and, like, it's like not just rock, there's like prog rock as the way it's organized. You get this and your next sample points to that, right? You've got some complex structure.
Yeah, and just as an adjunct, we've brought it up a few times on the show. I really think the unifying feature is, like, Thin Lizzy again. You know, because that's a band that works at such a perfect cross section of sort of like burly rock and roll, sort of proto metal, definitely a prog streak, and just guitar virtuosity as a centerpiece of the band. I see their tendrils reaching into so many things as I get older.
I should listen to more of that, because I love Emerald, right?
Oh, yeah.
But there's,
I mean, it's all awesome,
stuff.
You know. So let's talk about kind of complex rock structuring. So let's go to the next track, Crud Drips from the Shofar, which I think is quickly becoming like one of the big songs off this record, for obvious reasons.
That's one of the bangers.
Yeah, it's actually the longest song on the record, too. So GBK does a lot of songs that are formatted kind of like suites, that will have like two very distinct halves, almost like too many songs bolted together. And here you've got kind of a take on that. So we're going to be starting a little bit into the track that opens with like kind of a simple A-B variation with the riffs, and two riffs that are like definitively motivically linked, like linked in just rock and roll chord structure. And then we're going to have a CD sequence as sort of a bridge. And then it gets into an extended clean guitar passage. And that's where we're going to end. But what's really interesting is, okay, A, B, C, D, extended instrumental section, break for this elaborate clean guitar part. And what does it come back on? It comes back on variations of the bridge riffs. It doesn't go back to the A, B for like the big triumphant closer. It doesn't gin up kind of like new special riffs, but instead, you know, it elaborates on these sort of liminal phrases from the middle of the song. But let's just listen to how all these things lay out, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. So, yeah, we were talking about it while I was playing. Fascinating structural stuff across this song. One, this is, in a sense, a sort of one riff song. Like, all of the riffs are inherently motivically related to the central chord structure that lies underneath the whole thing. But there's all these little subtleties thrown in to make it more mysterious and more organic and more like kind of a rock and roll song. Like I pointed out, before you get into the clean guitar passage where it does that C-D-C pattern, goes back into C with the vocals, but just for a couple bars. It cuts early. You know, there's something very specialized about the way that operates. Certain just little shifts in the harmonic textures of those A and B riffs. Just fascinating, really guitar player music subtleties you don't typically hear in extreme metal.
Yeah, and that CD sequence at the end is kind of that's like the first really big riff moment on the album.
Oh, like that big pinch harmonic riff, right?
Yeah, well, certainly that. Yeah. Yeah, and there is one of the places where you get one of the things that's become a signature kind of GBK Argoslent rhythmic figure. Right? This sort of a triple time that feels like it's holding itself back.
Yeah, it's that sort of waltz time thing.
Heavy waltz, heavy end-weighted waltz, like end of every three is emphasized. Like House of Atreus uses that a lot. but they're but yeah, so yeah, the pinch harmonics at the end, man, are really cool, and that's a good example of well, you know, using the harmonic as part of the riff, and there's some of the more kind of cutting death metal tonality in there.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing across this record, across GBK, and I've actually been talking in the Discord lately to some guys kind of about like Paul Ledney stuff and early USBM in general. And we talked about it. We've had a few conversations about it, and I think we're coming to the conclusion that what makes like real USBM kind of defined in its own right, apart from the bands that are just trying to imitate the Europeans, is that the death metal was never lost entirely from the early US black metal bands. And I think even for GBK, there is still that death metal throughout everything. It's very subtle, but I think it's essential to the band's sound.
Yeah, so you think that happens on the earlier GBK too, because I hear it here much more than on Kosherat.
I think it's more distinct here.
There are a lot of things here that I'd be like, oh, that's kind of a death metal riff. You could say that's a Black Death riff or whatever, but they're really sort of sinister death metal, single string, death metal trem leads throughout this.
I guess I've always thought of it as almost more of a mood thing, or just like the way the guitar is played. Rather than the riffs themselves.
Better musicianship.
Better musicianship, just digging in on the chords a lot more, playing around with rhythmic configurations that you wouldn't typically hear in black metal, but you would hear in death metal or rock music.
That seems right. I don't know the Ledney stuff well at all, but that's, I think the next thing I need to go back to, right? You keep telling me that I'd really like Have a Hey.
You'd like it all, dude.
Yeah. So... But that has more rhythmic play in it than the Norse stuff, or the
on certain stuff. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's although some of it's very just like dang, 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 dang.
That's kind of what he's like classically known for, but especially on like later Profanautica stuff, or or if you listen to. I don't know. There's a lot of odd guitar rhythm stuff going on a lot of that shit, but it's just super primitive production, so you can't hear a lot of it. But a lot of that stuff is not straight trem. A lot of it has weird little intricate, almost like thrash-derived rhythms that are just so flattened out from high gain and bad production.
Well, I can hear instantly how the guitar and all that resembles death metal, too, because it has a kind of free atonality to it.
Yeah. The real harsh chromatic shit.
Yeah. A lost art. So, you good on that, or you got anything more?
Yeah, I was segueing, man. Death metal.
All right. Speaking of death metal, So I guess the funny thing is that despite the fact that this has a lot of punky stuff on it, the parts I like are some of the most long hair. Not necessarily the most proggy, but when they go full, like, metal long hair, right? And parts where Galal's classical chops come to the fore in the riffing itself, rather than say in the interludes or acoustic breaks, right? So here you get that on The Door is Marked with Sheep's Blood.
Invoke the prayer
Yeah, so there's a death metal riff at the end, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd say, in a sense, all of those are, like, almost death metal riffs.
Well, the more textured answering stuff is some of the stuff I probably like it because it sounds the closest to like the Swedish Black Death stuff that I like, you know. But yeah, definitely not a straight black metal riff. It's too sophisticated. And you were saying something that really applies to that sort of the to the chorded trem riffing on the second part of that, which is something about the discontinuous shapes in the riffs.
Yeah, I was saying one thing that I really appreciate about GBK riffs is that they never like neatly loop in on themselves. I mean, if you listen, for instance, if you're listening to like Franco-Finnish black metal these days, all those riffs are meant to repeat endlessly. Like they're meant for you to forget where they begin and end. GBK riffs have definite beginnings and endings. They tell a story in a single repetition, which make they're very linear melodic figures. There's no, apart from just kind of like connective tissue riffs, they never loop into themselves neatly, and I think that's a little bit of a lost art with a lot of extreme metal bands. As we've pursued further and further ways to make the music listenable and to make it approachable and to make it superficially pleasing to the ear, we've forgotten the power of something profoundly, refusing to just continue itself. A single statement with a period, I guess.
Yeah, well, so a good example of that would be so you get that first descending phrase, and that just ends, and the rest of the riff is a different riff that answers it.
Yep.
It just jumps from that chord at the bottom up to a kind of lead thing that's oscillating with a new chord figure. It's like there's discontinuity built into the riff itself, and that is that greater emphasis on distinct parts being juxtaposed with one another, rather than a sort of continuous streaming flow or process. That's very death metal as opposed to black metal.
Yeah, and I think it goes with the way GBK just builds songs, because GBK songs are distinct stories unto themselves. They are always about a thing in particular. As you can tell, I mean, just by looking at the lyrics for any of the previous records, they're very distinct figures. They're almost sort of stage play-like in a way.
Mm-hmm. I definitely heard that. There's almost a rock opera thing to this.
Oh yeah. I was talking to the guys on the Discord the other day. It's like Kosherat's my favorite one because it's where they just make fucking tiny rock operas the whole time.
Well, the whole record is a rock opera.
Yeah. It's like it's basically it's more like a Rush album than a fucking black metal album. Really.
Yeah, I think that is true, and that's part of the reason why it's just never gonna be my favorite thing. But there's the way it doesn't have any of the things that really turn me off about conspicuously proggy stuff.
Yeah, I think the
it's very disciplined music.
Yeah, I think the most highbrow stuff across the discography, and especially on this record, is practiced with a really admirable restraint.
Yeah, and the acoustic breaks are not like filler; they are really worth listening to. I mean, the clearest example of that is this sort of classical guitar solo at the end of Kosherat, or towards the back end of that record.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then they just like go into like basically a noisecore section at the end, and like that has to be there, and it's really cool, and it's a singular event.
Yeah, it's a great way to just kind of collapse the album into itself.
Yeah, it's not noodling or self-indulgent.
Well, speaking of the kind of theatrical element of this band and this record in particular, so I was curious as to what it was going to be like to listen to GBK with Unhold on vocals. He's been with the band since 2009, but obviously this is the first record they've really put out since he came in, and A lot of people had questions. It's like, is he going to be able to live up to, Black Lord or Grimnir? And I think that he really does. I really like his vocal performance on this record. Because GBK's vocalists always understood that this music required more than regular black metal vocals. They needed a theatrical performance. And in this case, Unhold has taken that philosophy, but he's not attempting to sound like one of the other vocalists. He's applying that to his own style, and I think he performs wonderfully doing that. And this track we're about to listen to, Two Forks and a Muttering Diviner, has some of the best examples of that. And then in the background, after we've heard some of the more theatrical stuff that he does, let's pay attention to the riffing here, because here's where we get some instances where, oh, these guys are listening to modern black metal and folding it into the GBK sound. So yeah, first Unhold, the insane, always sample the evil laugh. It's a rule on the show. It's like one of our fundamental principles. Then the sort of pained moaning chanting he's doing. It's this wonderful, that I'm just such a fucking sucker for a black metal vocalist that's going beyond and is really trying to communicate something with the voice apart from just being evil.
Yeah, anything that hits on the sort of Attila model of vocals.
100%. I was trying to avoid saying the name, but yes, you're exactly right. The Attila model.
Podcasts are about repeating yourself all the time.
But yeah, the Attila model, it's like, if we're going to do this stuff that's like neo-operatic music, why should the vocals not be like that as well? But beyond that, so Unhold's performance across this record is awesome. But listen to the riffs underneath. Those first couple riffs, where all that cool vocal stuff was happening, aren't those just like a hop, skip, and a jump away from Sargeist or Magla riffs?
All right, so I've thought about that because I saw it in the notes. I somehow get the sense that that Migla exists in a different universe to these guys. I think it's possible Galal has never listened to Migla. But the Sargeist thing kind of makes sense. Maybe not direct Sargeist influence, but certainly part of the same. Maybe. Horna's last record came out on WTC, right?
Yeah.
So those are part of the same. Sargeist is part of this universe.
Yeah, I guess.
Also, just canonical things, right? You know, if Senor Valand and Kristallnacht are at the foundation of that particular guitar style, then, you know, didn't GBK do a split with Senor Valand or something?
I no, they've done stuff with Absurd, and they've done stuff with some weird French guys before.
Chemin d'Ain, who did a split with Senor Valand.
Oh,
there you
okay.
go.
Yeah.
They're probably, there's a good chance this guy just has listened a lot to all the same shit that inspired the Finnish dudes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But also it's just like, one, I think it's impressive how easily they weave it in, and how you have to kind of be paying close attention to even realize that it sounds different.
That's true, yeah.
And two, part of it that's interesting to me, I guess it's kind of an academic question, but it's like, yeah, I mean, why wouldn't they listen to modern stuff? Like, why would this be necessarily in a different universe? Like, they weren't just listening to... I mean, Galal wasn't only listening to, you know, fucking bachata music over the past 17 years, right? He was doing something there. So it's like, why wouldn't they be interested in what's going on in black metal and folding in some of those techniques?
Oh yeah, I just meant Migla specifically. Like,
oh yeah, well that's kind of a stand-in for a whole array of modern black metal guitar ideas.
I hear what you mean. That it is, well, it's certainly, regardless of where the influences are coming from, it's certainly the style of guitar that is big now, right? And it shows an awareness of where the kids' heads are at. Not in a calculated way, just in a way that, like, you know what? It's almost like playing the kind of... It's almost like people would expect GBK to play that kind of riff a lot, and they'd be incorrect. But he's just thrown one on, you know, thrown some on, and it definitely makes sense in the context.
Yeah, and it happens to... And I think the thing that's so important about it is, yeah, he can take one of these sort of outside styles of riffs, contort it just slightly, and it slots in perfectly to the narrative of the song. It's not a matter of a throwaway sound of just something he liked. He realized there was a purpose to it, and he used it, and he used it better than almost anyone.
And we are back from talking about punk bands being silly to bring you Oimai Algeiou by Algaion, reissued by a imprint or sublabel of Regain. I think it's Shadow Records.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
They don't list it as an imprint, so maybe it's technically run by a different dude, but all the distribution and stuff is by Regain.
Yeah.
Anyway, for those of you who do not recognize the name, I have finally broken the no reissues rule.
Oh, God.
Yep. It's it's how we stay so hip and with it by not reviewing reissues. But rules are made to be broken, and almost 2 years in, it was time. And in part, it was just like, what could I choose that could go head to head with GBK without being the afterthought, right? And the other part is just like, what do I want to listen to now that I want to talk about on the show? But yeah, so this is a record that came out in 1995 in Sweden, and it is part of one of my favorite scenes, the Swedish Black Death scene in the mid and late 90s, and it was very ahead of its time in a way that really makes sense. It's being reissued now. I think this band existed at completely stable sort of capital until now, right? I knew about this record because I was a sort of obsessive about this scene. I think I found out about this band in 2009 or 10 or 11 or something, and I listened to some of this record. I don't know if I listened to the whole thing, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Oh, interesting, unique. But, I didn't, it wasn't something I kept listening to, right? It was just an interesting thing from the time. And Algaion has always been just like a thing that if somebody is really interested in Sacramentum or whatever, you can point them to, right? Now that this is being reissued, I hope this band gets more attention. And, as you yourself notice that this seems strangely like their time has finally come about, right?
Listeners, patrons, all people of the Terminus Co-Prosperity Sphere, I'm going to need you guys to give me some proof that this was released in 1995. And I don't mean like a Metal Archives listing or something. I need like a Polaroid photograph of one of you holding this CD up, dated in 1995. I need a 1995 era newspaper in the photo as well, because it is extremely hard to believe that this was released back then. According to the notes, this was recorded in late 94, which means listening to this record, I'm convinced the black metal guy is performing some sort of psyop on me right now. This being from late 94 rearranges shit for me completely psychologically in my understanding of this style. This sounds like it could have been like a cool thing that came out right now on a label that's like a little bit bigger than an Instagram label,
Mm-hmm.
This, I don't know how to articulate to people how contemporary this sounds. This is...
Well, what about it makes it sound contemporary? Let's start there.
So the way I describe this, in the notes and in general, is, okay, so you've got this sort of... individual riffs are a sort of maximalist, melodic Swedish Black Death thing. Very contiguous with, Sacramentum, Vinterland, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
However, structurally, this is super rigorous minimal music. You've got a very clearly fake, ultra minimal drum machine just kind of ticking away in the background. Most of the songs,
calling it fake isn't even right, because it's just it's
basically a metronome. Yeah.
Overtly mechanical drum machine.
It's almost industrial. Yeah. There's really only 3 or 4 riffs per song, and every song basically sounds the same, which is fine. I mean, but this is such a rigorously contiguous, homogenous thing, and that juxtaposition of like the really kind of high-minded individual riffs and the fact that there's only like 15 of them on the entire record, that seems like something that would happen now. You throw a distortion patch on the master channel of this during production, this is like the best of Instagram black metal right now.
Yeah, so, well, the Instagram stuff doesn't sound very Swedish. It's all, sounds French or whatever. But I know what you mean. This sounds like a contemporary underground release. So, yeah.
The idiosyncrasy, especially, like, the drum machine is something I keep going back to.
Mm-hmm.
This was not a period outside of, like, drug addicts like Mysticum where people wanted their drum machine to be obvious. Here, it's very clearly the point. Like, they do not want this to sound like a real drummer. Are there even crash cymbals in the drum programming? The drum programming is so unnatural compared to attempting to mimic a human drummer. This is almost like industrial black metal.
Yeah, I think it is a kind of industrial black metal. So let's get into that. So, well, I'll start with that real quick. Mm-hmm. I'll start with this, right? Like, this might seem like very naive music, right?
I mean, to a degree. Yeah.
Just because it's just, like, massive, made by young dudes in the very beginning of this sound, right? With just massive riffs, but very simple structures, right? Mm-hmm. And the riffs have this kind of, in a way, you could hear this as related to something like the classic example of naive music in this genre. Not as a negative, just in the sense that it's experiencing these ideas for the first time and being exhilarated by them, right? Is Vinterland, right? Mm-hmm. Like 16, those guys are like 16 or 17, and they record this album that's just full of the most florid, sentimental, Black Death riffing, and it succeeds beyond wildest expectations by sheer passion, right? Mm-hmm. And this record has some of that immediacy to it. It's just like, wow, this is the coolest way of playing riffs ever. We are just going to play these riffs, right? But in other ways, it's really sophisticated music in a way that, like, it has there's a clarity of intention to this that makes it different from that. And I think that's one thing that makes it sound so contemporary. It sounds as if people have had 30 years to reflect on how to put these pieces together.
Yeah.
Right? It's very idea-driven. And that basic, not in a heady way at all, this is retarded music, but it is there's a very thoroughly... There's a concept. Really cool structure for creating this very visceral, retarded music. It's very stupid smart. And one thing they're doing is sort of transposing form across genre, right? So what the structure of this record comes from Rotting Christ. Constant daka blast beats with just sort of trem kind of slower trem riffing that's synced deliberately to every hit, every snare hit. But the crazy thing about it is that when these guys recorded this in November, December of 94, there was only one Rotting Christ record, or the Non Serviam, right, the first sort of mature sounding Rotting Christ record, had been out for a month. So that means that they were listening entirely to Thy Mighty Contract and Passage to Arcturo. And Thy Mighty Contract is a great example of Rotting Christ being kind of a drone band and really focusing on these just hypnotic blasting riffs. And the whole thing is, how do we have this super brutal minimal drumming with these kind of manly, epic Dorian scale chorded riffs over it. And it was a lot more primitive sounding than even the stuff in Sweden at that time, right? Rotting Christ was like barbarian music. And these guys were clearly tapped into that, and to that kind of minimalism and primitivism. And yet then they take that format and they say, okay, well, we could do that, but with specifically Swedish riffs, right? With these riffs they were getting from bands like Dark Tranquillity or Dawn or a few others, which I can spurg out about later, right? And that's really smart, right? We can take this Rotting Christ format and do it with a very different kind of riff. And then the drumming, right? They're like, oh, what's unique about that Rotting Christ drumming? Well, it's like really, really minimal and hypnotic, right? So like, what if we just used a drum machine? We could do that with a drum machine. And it gets this sort of cold mechanized thing. Rotting Christ is constantly like, I think, snare kick, you know, just like taka 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 taka. These guys are constantly kick snare. It's like really fast, sped up thrash beat, kind of like early Cradle of Filth or Hecate, Hecatean Throne. But and the cool thing about the drums is, I think you nailed it with Mysticum, is that they're not pretending. It's not pretending not to be a drum machine, right? So that is a whole other layer of the concept, right? So it becomes industrial. And in terms of the wing of the scene they hung out with, that actually makes a lot of sense. Again, in some sense, right, because this record has some riffs that sound kind of melodeath and immediately gratifying in a way that's very popular now. You might think, oh, naive band, teenage big riffs band. And you might think, oh, maybe they hung out with Vinterland or something. No, these guys hung out with the avant-garde extreme of the Swedish scene, Soren, right? Who were playing some of the most severe and devastating variant on this style. And also with Puissance, which is a martial industrial act affiliated with Soren. And so the vocalist of Algaion, Martin Björkman, he played with the guy from Puissance and Octinomos, another black metal band that I really should listen to. I haven't checked out. And he went on to form Arditi, which is one of the biggest names in martial industrial now. So these guys were already interested in a kind of cold, abstract, geometrical industrial aesthetic. And they were superimposing these super lyrical, elegant neoclassical riffs on that. And it's really fucking cool. Do you want to play your sample?
Yeah, sure. So, so opening track, big fucking instrumental kind of synth orchestral piece. Wouldn't be out of place on like a Graveland record. Then, Natrices Educati. This happens.
Although, it kind of was already fully formed by then. That's a weird chronology thing, is that a lot of the Swedish Black Death stuff is not... Although, wait, sorry, we just kept rolling it.
Anyway, okay, so we were talking that whole time that was playing. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, there's all these ideas, and all of them are kind of valid, but then you look at the actual chronology, and it's like, dude, there were only demos from, like, all these other bands that we're talking about. And sure, they might have been listening to the demos, but getting to this from those demos requires so many fucking layers of, construction and then deconstruction of a sound that barely even existed yet, Like how you get here in 1994 is blowing my fucking mind. Because this sounds like a deliberate reduction and stripping down of a style that basically didn't exist yet.
Yeah, so the way it's reduced, right, on this particular song especially, right, just that kind of like, dun, 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 right, that kind of just like, let's do the really obvious thing really hard, right, that really, the first things you really get like that are The Gallery, which came out in the same year, right, The Gallery by Dark Tranquillity, and actually that's more sophisticated, but came
way
out right
technical,
about, came out later in the same year. In Flames, and the Jester race wouldn't come out for over another year, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of stripping that stuff down, these guys are definitely pioneers. Other stuff. A weird thing about the Swedish sound, and a thing I've realized more after doing more digging, is that you might think of like... the way I had pictured it to myself when I was younger was that, there were death metal bands who started getting more interested in melody because of what they heard in, like, Mayhem and Dark Throne. I think, if anything, the influence was probably moving in the other direction, because the Somber Lane came out in 93. And it's not...
That's, like, the only thing that I could think of.
It's not all those riffs, but it has those riffs in it. And... the demo, Into Infinite Obscurity in 91, I think, already has those riffs on it. That's because they're listening to Morbid Angel and shit.
Yeah.
But, Dark Tranquillity, Sky Dancer is 93. That's been out for quite a while by the time... That's August 93. And there were demos before that where the riffing style was fully established, right? Moonclad Reflection and Tranquillity, and, Moonclad Reflection, rather, was the EP. Has riffs in that style already in 92. So it's happening way earlier than you'd think. And it's coming out of death metal and sort of thrash and heavy metal. The other thing is Eucharist, who've been forgotten about. I gotta say, I don't think I'd be aware of this band if that guy Grizzly Butts hadn't mentioned them once. So, got credit where credit is due.
No, I know Eucharist. I guess the thing that...
Eucharist, Velvet Creation, 93. And Dawn, Nersolen is early 94. January 94. So these guys are in the same country as all these other bands, and in at least parallel social circles. And so they do have this wealth of things in these riffing styles to draw from, but I think part of their original contribution is this really disciplined simplification.
Yeah. I mean, I also had just like a crazy idea of like, I can imagine something that would line up chronologically. I can imagine a crazy way of getting here from taking just kind of the saddest, most elegant parts of Burzum, like single string trem riffs, combining that with sort of proto Gothenburg shit.
Yeah.
Because early Burzum is, 90, 91, 92. It's just, but like the whole delivery of the whole thing is truly, this must have been fucking bizarre at the time.
I think it was. That's one reason it was never big. They did one more in 97 called General Enmity, and then, sort of disappeared for a while, did a thing that sounded more like Melodeath in 2010, and then no. I mean, you know, I think you're right on it with Burzum. Like, these guys are clearly interested in the hypnotic repetition in black metal, right? Mm-hmm. They also really are getting it from Rotting Christ. Yeah. Like, if anything, the press release, if anything, overemphasizes that because it's what distinguishes them from their contemporaries. But they were really listening to primitive Hellenic and Norse stuff. And, you know, that puts them with the other of my favorite, you know, Soren from Sweden was clearly listening to, like, early, like, Transylvanian Hunger.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this also sounds like proto Amon Amarth in a lot of places too.
Yeah, and you yourself have pointed out how black metal-y Amon Amarth sounds at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
so. Wait, let's check One Cent from the Golden Hall.
No, that's way later. That's like, way later. That's like 97, 98. Yeah.
Goddamn. Sacramentum is not even Finis Malorum comes out. The EP comes out in this same year.
Oh yeah, dude!
When it came out,
dude. After I listened to this, I was checking through everything to try and figure out the timeline on this shit. Yeah. It's like so everything we're thinking of came after it. You know?
Yeah. So basically, this band is a kind of, you know, they get. I think in the past, right? They're sort of remembered as an also ran as this kind of marginal, interesting foot. Also ran isn't fair. That usually implies not being great, right? Marginal footnote, right?
It turns out they're just a quarter century ahead of their time.
And they were right in the midst of all of this as it was happening. Yeah. Like, right there for it. I mean, and, you know, this came out before Soren, and it came out before Dawn's most black metal stuff. It came out before Slaughter Sun, too. Yeah. So, it's...
Let me... Yeah. Let me play another sample. It's like we can do the history lesson forever. And we should just do like a 3-hour Prime episode.
That's
just
trying to have a podcast.
Figure the album out. Yeah, that's why. So we can do the same. No, bro, but it was 93. It couldn't be, you know, that kind of thing. On the Reach of Zephania. So this record does get more complex as it goes, but it's still, like, relentlessly primitive structurally. These songs are so fucking blocky and so stripped down and so angular in the way the pieces join together. This sounds like it's like I keep saying, this sounds like a concerted exercise by people who already know all the complicated parts of the style and are deliberately reducing it. Which I guess is a thing that could be happening here, but that means they're deconstructing a style before it even fully exists. You know, it's like, So let's listen to this one. And also, for some reason, it sounds like Isatai.
that particular chord okay, we argued through all that too.
Yeah.
At the end, you were saying something about that chord progression.
That chord progression at the end. Well, one, that really sounds like Isatai, and two, like, I cannot think of a precedent for that. Like,
no.
if you can think of one from, like, the Swedish scene, but it's like, that sounds like that's a totally fucking, like, 2010s thing right there.
Yeah, or like 2020s. Like, that particular, like, sort of, it's very... No, I agree. There are a lot of harmonic ideas in here that there aren't necessarily a precedent for. Some of the stuff at the first half of the album, some of the stuff has a lot more... it has the shapes of things that would become Melodeath riffs, but much more disharmonic sort of intervals in it between the two guitars. That particular thing at the end, kind of like reverent... that cool thing that I don't really have words for is something that, you heard Isatai do. Meslamtea does it. And it's like what it is, it's something like a really intense, it's like a really it's like a really sweet sounding resolution, but played with extremely high tension in each chord.
Yeah,
like that.
It's almost like one of those like Japanese black metal riffs.
Yes,
you know?
for sure. No, Hakuja would do that in the 2010s or earlier than that. It is super Japanese. But yeah, it was here first.
I really, it's hard for. There has to be ideas on this that were just unprecedented. You know, and like maybe in parallel some other people figured them out, but it's like there's certain shit on this record. I mean, I basically buy into the idea that you can get here from some of the primordial Swedish ideas, but dude, there's got to be shit that had never been done before right here.
Well, so, I mean, the thing I was trying to stress was that the whole format of the band had never been done before.
Yeah.
Like, the originality is at the roots of it in the concept. It's just like... you do this reductive, hypnotic... The whole idea of taking this reductive approach to stuff that up until then had been extremely death metal in terms of its technique. And, and just putting that as the matter. You take that stuff as the matter and you put it, or the content, and you put it in forms coming from really primitive black metal and industrial.
Yeah, I was about to say
that's super original.
That's exactly the thing. It's like we're associating it with this whole kind of Swedish melodic Black Death idea, and then you're taking the melodic results of the combination of those styles, and then you're stripping it back down into just like black metal 2.0. It's which is such a radical idea for 94.
A thing I'm kind of trying to say is that the Swedish Black Death, I think, actually isn't really... I mean, as the black metal guy, it was a little uncomfortable for me to come to terms with this, but I don't think it's that influenced by black metal. Like, Swedish Black Death is like, I think it basically develops... They're clearly paying attention to what's happening in Norway, and they're clearly influenced by shit from the 80s that, like, trendy death metal bands were not, right?
Yeah.
And by Morbid Angel and shit. But, they have the same... But, like, musically, it really is coming from death metal, thrash, and heavy metal before any of the sort of... Euronymous chording starts coming in.
Yeah.
It's like those riffs are on the somber lane before he starts to sound like Euronymous, right? It's crazy. It's what it is like we need a different word for it. It's a specific Swedish style of extreme metal. And these guys are doing it and linking it to Norwegian minimalism and Greek minimalism in a way that hadn't been done. So in the big picture, which is the most important picture, this is super original music. But I agree with you that, like, in the detail work, it has to be also. Like, that kind of, like, that whole mood in those chords is very original at this time. A lot of this music has this kind of solemn, elegiac, end of the anime where the world's exploding feel.
Yeah.
That is quite different from melancholy stuff at this time. It's not the same kind of melancholy you get on Sacramentum or on, Dissection.
Yeah,
so
it's very... Yeah, it's like... Let's say, okay, Sweden '94. Were they able to get a bootleg copy of Ninja Scroll from Japan or something? You know, it's like, are they early weebs possibly? You know?
One of the guitarist, Matthias Camijo, looks kind of Japanese, but he might just be Finnish because
yeah,
he might just have Sami blood. There is the Finnish Japanese. There is the theory that Finnish and Japanese are part of the same language group, which would explain a lot.
I've never heard of that. That's interesting.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense when you start thinking about it, right? But yeah, so one thing about this track that you just played, On the Reach of Zaphonia, is one of the strongest. I think the last 3 tracks are the best on the record.
Yeah, it's kind of...
Would you agree?
Yeah, the whole thing just keeps raising the stakes throughout the whole album.
Yeah. The first 3 tracks are kind of like melodethy type riffs with kind of harsher intervals in a lot of places. And then these last 3 hit this mood of kind of like, they're these slow, stretched out, many-noted processional melodies that have this mournful, sort of like sweetly mournful vibe. And On the Reach of Zaphonia is the first of them. And one thing you realize here is that, like, they're strongest when they do this really elaborate stuff. And stuff that, you know, if a band didn't pull it off, I might say, oh, that's sentimental, oh, that's lame, or whatever. This band nails it, in part because the delivery of it is hard as nails. Right? But, so the next one, Kratos, is, one of the more rotting Christy ones, for sure. And it's also where, you know, embracing that kind of Swedish excess, that kind of like, when they get the most over the top and sentimental is also when the music is the most ripping and aggressive. That's like when they find when they really get their hooks in it. So right now we're going to be starting at the there's going to be some A-B riff trading. We're starting at the very end of an A riff and going into the B, back to the A, and then beyond.
See, there we get the like really elaborate, like basically Gothenburg shit.
Yeah, right at the very end where it fades out. But right before that, right? That is a mature Rotting Christ riff. There must have been a few like that on Thy Mighty Contract, but like that's the kind of stuff they would be doing on Non Serviam, which came out a month before this was fucking recorded.
Yeah, it's... Dude, what the fuck, man?
Like, they had so internalized the logic of how Rotting Christ played guitar that they could just do the same shit at the same time. Like, it... So, yeah, that kind of, like, awesome heavy metal strut riff is super Rotting Christ. But before that, right, you get these long, slow, cascading, you know, lyrical things, right? Riffs that just sing. And you get this sort of... Oh wait, sorry, that's the wrong one. They're just all so good and long, right? You know, when they start going so over the top on these last songs, he starts bringing in things on the guitar that give it a lot more life, like those grace notes, that 5/1 thing. We do.
Yeah, and
you get like real neoclassical technique.
Yeah, there's like crazy theatrical shit happening on guitar, but within these fucking like relentlessly blocky 4 of this, 8 of that structural context, which is like, you know me, that's a thing that I've always loved.
Yeah, sure. I mean, me too. I love a song that can just work based on that.
Yeah, dude, what the fuck is going on here?
And like all these 3 last songs, you know, you were talking on the GBK review about riffs that just end.
Yeah.
Right? These last 3 songs are all endless fucking riffs.
Yeah.
There are chord similarities between the 2 main riffs on each of them. Like, the riffs kind of like spill into one another. And I could listen to these last 3 tracks just on repeat, you know, just indefinitely. So yeah, you know, for the last, you'll hear the same thing on my last sample, which is from The Last Delusion, the final track. This does have some 1995 female vocals in the middle, but they're done very, very well. Aside from that, haha, end of anime riffs go boom. We could go out on some note about how we have to rethink everything now, but I'll just...
You want to get high and play Chrono Trigger?
I was more of a Chrono Cross guy, but yeah.